18-year-old Leah Betts with what was to prove a fatal dose of ecstasy, and who has still to answer for it? Dispatches investigates.
On Dispatches tonight, a unique insight into drugs, clubs and organised crime, and the inside story of a death that shocked the nation. Tonight, the question that 2 trials have so far failed to answer: who sold the ecstasy tablet that killed Leah Betts? Dispatches goes on his trail with exclusive evidence from this man, doorman at the club where the drug was bought. Tonight for Dispatches, reporter Alex Thompson explores the criminal underworld of Essex, revealing the links between one notorious gang and those who guarded the door. That's Dispatches, on a national concern: ecstasy, intimidation, and every parent's worst nightmare in The Firm.
Under cover of darkness, just over a year ago, members of The Firm, a major Essex drugs gang, are on their way to a meeting. Their Range Rover pushes down a lonely farm track. Seconds later, all 3 men were dead, blasted in the head from a pump-action shotgun at point-blank range. Craig Rolfe, aged 26, the driver, killed so fast his hands were still on the wheel, 1 foot firmly on the brake. Slumped in the back, Pat Tate, 37, a violent man, a bodybuilder, shot in the stomach and head. In front, Tony Tucker, 38, a prominent member of The Firm, a gang of up to 80 people. There was so little blood spilt, those who found them thought they were asleep. 2 men from outside The Firm have been charged with the murders. As the police went to work, news ran through the underworld. The astonishment of gangsters matched that of detectives.
The murder itself sent a message throughout the country. There was not a villain, you know, in the whole of the country who wasn't talking about this murder. They could not understand how 3 people could be shot together with the reputation that they had.
This man knows all about that reputation and the violence which surrounded The Firm.
I still can't believe what happened to him, really. I was quite upset about it, because they were my friends after all.
For the first time on television, Bernard O Mahoney will describe life inside The Firm and how it links to the death of a teenager that shocked the nation. In doing so, he's breaking the criminal's code of silence at great personal risk.
I know things went wrong, but they're still human, and I still had feelings for them, and it's just tragic.
A few miles away, a family was also facing tragedy in the national spotlight.
It's coming up to 12 minutes past 7.
An Essex teenager is in a coma after taking a... Leah Betts from Lettendon near Malden collapsed at her 18th birthday party after taking...
Just 3 weeks before the murders, Leah Betts had died after swallowing a tablet of pure ecstasy. Until tonight, nobody has overcome the fear of The Firm to show how Leah Betts was as much a victim of them as a victim of ecstasy. Leah's parents embarked on a national campaign against drug dealing.
I've got anger, hate, and I've got love. I've got love for my daughter. I've got anger for the people with the drugs, and I hate this bastard that supplied them.
So there's so many dead people connected to this story. Leah, it's just a waste, a tragic waste, and it bothers me a lot.
To follow events from the firm to the death of Leah Betts, you have to enter the criminal badlands of Essex. Bernard O Mahoney's story is one of extreme violence, and yet it takes place in the setting of orderly Basildon Newtown. But beneath the skin of this place, down in the criminal ganglands, there is real fear. Inquiries from journalists are met with, at best, a wall of silence, if not outright intimidation. And the penalties here for grassing on criminals are swift and violent. The firm built its reputation around the explosive temper and drug-induced rages of Pat Tate.
Tate was a violent man by nature. He also used drugs to a large extent. He used steroids in a big way to actually assist his bodybuilding and work in the gymnasium. When he walked into the door, he in fact filled the doorway, and so quite an intimidating character just by his physical presence.
A presence honed by eating steroids in abundance and working out fanatically at the Academy gym near Southend. The manager recalls Tate, Tucker and Rolfe as regulars.
They were gentlemen here, basically. I mean, outside, yes, they had a reputation. I suppose people were probably wary of them, but they were nice people in here, to me anyway.
Tucker enjoyed a cherished status symbol, being chief minder to a major boxer. He accompanied the former super middleweight champion Nigel Benn to the ring and to public appearances, large and menacing. His house, £250,000 worth of bungalow on the eastern fringes of London. Naturally, Tucker was a cash buyer. To enter the world of the firm is to leave behind the outward face of Basildon and descend into the gangland violence Bernard became part of. Away from the straight world where Basildon shops in the brutally modern precincts, or earns an honest living in the tractor factory which dominates the town. Bernard found a rather different place when he washed up here after a spell in prison.
Finishing a prison sentence for wounding somebody, and I was granted parole, but I had to give a parole address, and my girlfriend lived in Basildon at the time, so she let me use her address, and I moved here and I've been here ever since. It's a very, very violent town, very violent. All the sort of up-and-coming criminals, there's no established sort of hierarchy of criminals here because it's a new town and all new faces, so they're all sort of jostling for position, you know.
Essex's problem, if you like, is that since the war have had an influx of people from the East End of London who have settled here on new housing estates and indeed have purchased property in Essex. And this old culture has come with them.
1986, out of prison, out of work, into Basildon. Bernard needed a fresh start. He was not the kind of man who was going to wander around the local job centre. This was where he went in search of work, Her Majesty's Prison Maidstone. In particular to prisoner number 058110.
Rich Clay speaking.
Morning, mate. Yeah.
Okay, Smithy, you're coming down tomorrow?
Yeah. Okay.
See you.
Okay, see you later. God bless, bye.
Secretly taken photos in prison and phone calls revealed that man as Reginald Cray. Bernard had yet to meet the Essex firm. Reggie had powerful connections.
He suggested I go and see somebody who could get me a bit of additional work. I did, and I was given the job.
As doorman at Raquel's nightclub, holding over 600 people, Bernard's arrival began a process which spiralled out of control. It was a violent place.
The police were in attendance, if not every night, at least twice a week, with riot vans, and there's incidents of, it may sound a lot, but it was 150 people fighting in the street outside. A man was blinded in there, in one eye permanently. Another man had 168 stitches, and he was cut with a knife, Stanley knife, on his stag night.
And that was just outside the club. Inside, the doorman had a secret arsenal to, in their words, protect themselves.
Personally, people carried things like ammonia and knuckle dusters. There were weapons secreted all around the building. Guns, baseball bats for less sort of trivial matters, knives.
And it brought examples to show us.
This is Spanish, which is kept in reception at Raquel's, and this knuckle duster with a hook on it, which someone had in their back pocket for personal use, really.
These weapons, they weren't there for show?
No, nothing was there for show, no.
It's 9 o'clock. This is Ruth Collin. An Essex teenager who's in a coma after taking ecstasy remains in a critical condition in hospital.
Bernard's arrival at Raquel's meant the first connection was in place on the route to Leah Betts' death. And all the while, Bernard was cementing his gangland contacts. He received an invitation to Ronnie Cray's funeral in March 1995. A bizarre mixture of celebrity send-off and underworld convention. Bernard knew he was moving in the right circles. Back in Basildon, many suffered at the hands of Bernard and his mates on the door. Few were willing to recount their experience in public. But Barry Chart, a fellow bouncer at Raquel's, recalls a difference of opinion with Bernard.
I was just totally smashed to pieces. Like it was, my head was right out here. My front teeth were all kicked out. My wrist was broken in various places. Cracked ribs and that. You know, I was in quite an awful state. I was in such an awful state, my daughter couldn't even look at me for about 2 weeks.
2 years on, he still can't lift heavy objects, and every time the false teeth come out, there's a reminder of Bernard's violence, yet not a word about pressing charges.
They wanted me to prosecute and that, but it's just something that you just don't do, you know? It's something that it's like a code.
Well, hang on, you've been badly beaten, you've been scarred for life, and yet you say it's something you just don't do?
Well, I mean, you got a family to protect and things like that, you know, you just don't do those sort of things, you know.
When the police called him in, he saw they knew all about Bernard O Mahoney, or Bernard King as he was then known.
There was a file there and it had like a big bad Bernie King on it. So obviously they knew what he was like or whatever.
But the violence was becoming a problem. Bernard needed heavier doormen from out of town to control the situation at Raquel's. One Sunday night he came here to the Epping Country Club. It was his passport to the firm. For the first time he met its key members. Some in the firm already had a large empire, controlling doors at clubs across the region. Club UK in Ipswich, Hollywood's in Romford, Club Art in Southend and Club UK in South London. Lucrative and legitimate. But what the firm really wanted was not legitimate. Because controlling the doors at clubs can mean running the drug sales inside, where the real money can be made.
I'm not condoning it, but there is a very good argument for doormen controlling drugs in clubs. If there is no control, you'll get people in clubs selling youngsters aspirins, their granny's heart pills. There'll be confrontation amongst other dealers, violence amongst other dealers, and God knows what.
You're saying that doormen in Britain's nightclubs are in effect trading standards officers for the illegal selling of drugs?
Yes.
Across Britain?
Across Europe.
Bernard and Tony Tucker went into partnership, controlling the door of Raquel's. The second connection was set up on the pathway leading to the death of Leah Betts. Raquel's was a valuable door to add to the firm's portfolio. Now Bernard had that and the muscle to take on anyone giving him trouble. Like rival hardman Jason Draper, whose gang had tried to fight Bernard's team outside Raquel's. On August Bank Holiday 3 years ago, Bernard and a posse of 14 others knew Draper would be drinking in the Bull, a pub on the outskirts of Basildon.
I just knew you couldn't just hurt him, because he had the same ideas as us. If he was stabbed, he'd think I've got to go back and do worse.
Are you saying you'd have to kill him?
That was the decision reached, yeah. And it was agreed on Bank Holiday Monday I'd go to this pub with other people. He would be temporarily blinded with cleaning fluid, industrial cleaning fluid, squirted with it, pushed through the doors, beaten, and left on the pavement, and he'd be shot.
The fact that the bull was packed with a bank holiday crowd of families made no difference. The gang piled in, spotted Draper, and went to work regardless.
Jason was at the bar with his friends. He was squirted with fluid and attacked with batons, knuckle dusters, and a machete. He was hit a couple of times with the koshes and a couple of times with the machete. His eye was bleeding, his head was bleeding, and the manager managed to lock him in the cellar. It was just the way, you know.
Yet again, the manager remains too frightened to speak in public about the experience. By now, the firm was establishing a national reputation for intimidation, enforcement, and drug dealing.
They wouldn't dirty their hands, I don't think, with actually selling it to the kids in the discos or the clubs. So you need that network to be set up for the eventual sale of the drugs, and you know, the tentacles of that could fan out, you know, over an enormous area.
To people like Kevin Whittaker, whose parents lived comfortably away from the more deprived estates of Basildon. Kevin had become caught up in the firm's drug dealing. His parents took calls from a taciturn man who cannot be named for legal reasons.
It was just a case of, is Kevin there? No. Can I take a message? I'll just tell him called.
Bernard was told that one day 2 members of the firm picked Whittaker up. He owed them money and they were angry. Kevin Whittaker was in serious trouble. They headed out of town. In the car, the firm threatened to give him a forcible overdose of drugs.
It went from a threat to actually giving him drugs.
How?
He was injected 3 times in his right arm.
Do you know what he was being injected with?
Special K, which is a veterinary drug, and cocaine.
They reached an industrial estate on the edge of Basildon.
Come on. Come on, get up. Come on, get up.
But he couldn't get up, because Kevin Whittaker was dead. The firm had claimed another life. Afraid they'd be spotted, they put him back in the car and drove several miles before dumping his body at the roadside. The coroner recorded an open verdict. He stated,
"There was a series of relatively fresh injection marks over the right elbow, with some older marks to the right forearm, consistent with non-therapeutic injection."
His parents were horrified. They have never felt it was the suicide of a drug addict, as some suggested.
He didn't like needles. We were told initially that there were 3 marks in his right arm. I said, well, he's right-handed, so he wouldn't have done that. If he was going to do something, it would be in his left arm.
Well, the verdict was an open verdict the coroner gave, but I felt it should have been a murder verdict. But I was just flabbergasted, really, at the verdict, open verdict.
Essex police say the file's open, but they've no firm evidence that Kevin Whittaker was murdered.
He couldn't drive, Whittaker, yet he ended up miles from home. He didn't inject himself with drugs, he was terrified of needles. But the police couldn't prove it. They met with this wall of silence, and so it wasn't pursued. He was just written off as someone who died of a drugs overdose.
The firm had taken a man's life directly, with little publicity. But Bernard's time with the gang was going to cause another drug death, and with it a shockwave of national attention, which would blow the firm apart. 1994, and by now the firm had a national reputation for drugs and general enforcement. There were frequent business trips outside Essex. Some members passed 3 industrious days in Bristol, dealing with a man who owed money. They began their visit by plunging the man's house into darkness.
When John came home, switched on the light, nothing happened. Went into the living room, it was in total darkness. He just thought the bulbs had gone, but he was jumped upon, trussed up with rope, put into a car, taken to a... can only be described as a cellar, really, on an industrial unit. He was kept there for 3 days. He was beaten whilst blindfolded. He was blindfolded throughout. His fingers were broken with pliers and generally tortured.
Back in Basildon, Raquel's was becoming one of the most popular venues in the area. Its Friday rave nights are remembered with much affection by some.
It was brilliant. It was the best thing that ever happened to Basildon. I mean, comparative to the clubs that were around, it was the only thing for young people.
There obviously was drugs going on in there, but they couldn't stamp it out, and if they saw anybody in there, they'd chuck them out, so...
But they wouldn't call the police?
No, but if you called the police for everybody with 1 pill, then you could have the police down there every week.
You just knew it was all happening because you could see everything, you'd see people doing things. Dealing, doing little bits of deals, and this, that and the other. It was just obvious that, you know, what was happening in there. But I mean, everybody knew what was going on, so it wasn't just hidden.
The leaders of the firm moved in quickly to control this trade.
You know, I were then approached by a local man, Mark Murray, who said he'd been supplying drugs to the raves in Southend. He was well known locally as a drug dealer. Could he have exclusive rights to sell the drugs in Raquel's, for which he would pay a percentage of his earnings? So and he agreed that it would be all right. The stage was set, if you like.
Mark Murray had another perfect marketplace sorted. Mid-30s, designer clothes, showy and brash. Murray had a dangerously loud mouth, plus the typical dealer's style, staying put, watching his drug sellers fan out through the club.
He was just flash, obviously, with his tipping, and he was always buying big rounds. And obviously he was older than a lot of people in there. So, and he was just, the kind of way he dressed and the way he portrayed himself was flash, basically, and it wasn't anything.
He always stood in the same place?
He was always by our bar.
For the whole evening?
Not constantly, but generally for a lot of the time. He wasn't really a dancer. You wouldn't see him on the dance floor, would you? But he was generally around our bar, talking to people and that. But.
So you got someone who's very flash, obviously got a lot of money, always in there on that night, doesn't move much from where they are, doesn't dance, and is slightly older. Does that not arouse some suspicion about what he might have been doing?
We weren't there to have suspicions, we were there to serve him. I mean, we didn't sit there and think, I wonder what Mark's doing here.
A former dealer knew exactly what Murray was doing there.
Mark Murray was a very greedy man. He would take drugs from the people that were dealing them on big promises that he'd sell the lot and return the money, but he never did. He owed a lot of people money.
And he was a dealer?
He was a dealer, yeah.
In Raquel's?
In Raquel's. And I've dealt drugs with Mark Murray, yeah, in my time.
But what makes you so sure that Murray was dealing in Raquel's?
I've seen Murray dealing in Raquel's.
Openly?
Openly, yeah.
What did you see?
I've seen Murray going up to young ladies, young lads selling these, or if not, he'd pass them on to his runners and sell them.
With the protection of the firm, Murray felt he could afford to be arrogant and open about his trading. Other dealers describe how protected Murray was.
I've personally seen Murray go into a club, walk straight up to the door and not even get his name checked off the guest list. Straight in, no mucking about, no searching, nothing. He'd take the boys in with him who'd be holding the gear. Someone would go up to him, Mark, I need some gear, and he'd take them to one of his dealers, and as soon as they'd introduced, he'd walk away. He was arrogant to the point where he believed he owned the club. I'm sure he did.
But Murray's world began to fall apart. Across the southeast, his dealers were being busted. In just over a year, several young men he'd used were charged with selling drugs. Club UK, South London, 2 years ago, and the police burst in, a mass televised drugs raid. Murray's dealers here panicked. They dropped over 800 ecstasy pills on the floor. Even worse for him, they'd been supplied on credit by the boss of the firm. Murray was in a mess even he couldn't talk his way out of. He faced a choice of disappearing or meeting the firm. He went to see them. Bernard says the firm forced Murray to sell its pills to repay the debt. The tablets, called apples, were pure ecstasy.
And these apples, of course, were the ones which led to the death of Leah Betts?
Yes, yeah.
And you are categorically sure that Murray was selling those and selling those in Raquel's?
I know for a fact he was, yeah.
How do you know for a fact?
Because he was complaining bitterly about having to buy them off to pay off this debt. He didn't want them, for the simple reason they were strong. If a person took one, they wouldn't go back to Murray that night, because they would last all night, whereas the weak ones he used to sell, people would probably have to buy 4 off him in an evening to reach that elusive high, you know.
To repay his debt, and with many of his sellers arrested, he had to deal himself on the floor of Raquel's. 12 miles away in her home village, Leah Betts was preparing to celebrate her 18th birthday with an ecstasy tablet.
The Leah Betts tragedy began on Saturday night when Leah's brother called out to her parents that their 18-year-old daughter had collapsed at their home in Latchington near Malden.
With Leah Betts in a coma, the media swung into overdrive. For once, the parents of a drug victim wanted publicity. The photo of Leah on a life support machine was released. She became overnight a national symbol of parents' concern about drugs. The effect on Raquel's was immediate and final.
It was dead, totally dead. There was television cameras outside, police outside, people handing out their pictures of Leah Betts in a coma, and obviously that wasn't the environment for people to come in. They didn't want to come and have police searching them, police looking at them. They didn't want their mums particularly seeing them walking into clubs, maybe.
Tim Gillett has joined me in the studio. Tim.
David, bad news. The 18-year-old Latchington teenager, Leah Betts, has died at Broomfield Hospital. Leah's parents have told a news conference at the hospital.
She told me that she had taken it before, 3 times before. This was the 4th occasion. She told me that it had been dubs she'd taken before, and this was an apple. She told me she'd even taken a joint. And we subsequently found out afterwards that she'd even tried speed. Now, it comes home a little bit hard because you think that your daughter is pure and clean, and there wasn't any telltale signs up until then.
For the firm, Leah's death was catastrophic. The public scrutiny was intense. They were under suspicion. One of those being questioned was Mark Murray. To take the heat off, the firm tried to get Stephen Packman, a friend of Leah Betts, to admit to the crime. When he was questioned by police, the firm put him in the national spotlight. Bernard, wearing a concealed tape recorder for the News of the World, met Packman at a filling station. A photographer was hidden close by.
So it's well lit, some video, plenty of people there, just so he'd feel safe and we'd feel safe, because I thought there was a possibility we'd be set up as well, you know.
Well, you could have been set up.
Yeah, because been a lot of allegations made about the doorman that week.
He showed us where they'd stood for the press photographer.
So you came over in position here on the edge of the garage forecourt. Now, what was it that Packman said that so convinced you the man who sold the ecstasy tablets was Mark Murray?
He was describing him to be about mid-30s, collar length, straggly hair, wearing a blue shot jacket, bomber-style jacket, but it was more where he described where he was standing, you know. He said he was at the top of the stairs at the top bar, which is where Mark Murray always stood. So I was convinced it was Mark Murray. I know it was Mark Murray.
So you're in a very illuminated area. You're under video surveillance from the garage forecourt. Where was the press photographer?
In the van over there, concealed.
The newspaper got its pictures of the innocent Packman. Suspicion was deflected from the firm. The photos and tapes became central to the prosecution case during last week's trial. Packman was acquitted. To this day, he has never identified Mark Murray. When Murray dealt at the club during the Friday night raves, he lived here in Basildon's maze-like Summercoats estate. But Murray's now fled to Spain, from where we secretly taped him, protesting his innocence.
And this other thing about how I've been already, I've been taken in, already said I'm a drug dealer and this, that and the other. I've never been arrested for anything in my life. A convicted drug dealer, he said in the paper. What's all this? So at the moment, you're saying to clear my name, but at the moment, there's nothing wrong with my name. If there was anything wrong with my name, there'd be a warrant out for my arrest, surely. See, the thing is, I've never met this fucking Packman. So this is what I'm thinking. Has the fella been threatened? I'm not going to criminally say because I've done nothing. There's people I know, you know what I mean, that are, how can we say, dangerous people.
Is it those dangerous people who are keeping Murray abroad?
I'm not coming back to England for a moment.
In a statement last week, Essex police said,
Mark Murray was arrested during the course of the inquiry. There was insufficient evidence to charge him, and no fresh evidence to lead to further arrests. As far as this investigation is concerned, this is as far as we can go.
Immediately after Leah Betts' death, Bernard claims the police did not question all the door staff, who were obviously a key group of suspects.
I was head of security there, and I've not been interviewed about the goings-on at Raquel's by anybody, and no other doorman has either.
You're quite sure of that?
I'm positive of it.
Essex police say they did formally interview door staff, but Bernard maintains the staff list police used did not cover many of the men who worked on the fatal night.
The real people have got away scot-free, haven't they?
But I totally agree with you. It's the big fish that I would love to stick out of sight, throw away the key, and never worry about again.
What parents don't understand is that recreational drug use is now so common that kids will go into a club and they will pop a pill in exactly the same frame of mind as we would have a pint. They see it as no different to that.
The story of Raquel's and the firm raises major questions for club owners, the council and the police. Questions echoed across Britain. On the issue of the club's licence, Essex police told dispatches,
there were no grounds to oppose the granting of a licence to the holder of Raquel's. There is a vast difference between inference or allegations and the type of hard evidence which can be put before a court.
Last December, and a new name, a new nightclub for young Basildon. Queues go round the block for the place European leisure hopes will erase bad memories of Raquel's. Club Europa opening up on the site of the old Raquel's nightclub, and the management have made it plain that they want to run a club as far as possible which is free from drugs. But to do that, they're going to have to exercise tight control over the door and not let the door be controlled by gangsters. European Leisure's one of the biggest nightclub chains, yet Bernard's prison sentence for malicious wounding came as news to his former boss when told of it during last week's trial. Equally, did they investigate the series of fly-by-night companies through which the firm ran its doorman? The police accuse Raquel's management of leaving their doorman too much to themselves.
The information that I got throughout the investigation was that there was a lack of support, really, for the door staff. And perhaps they weren't as aware of what they should and shouldn't be doing in respect of people attending and getting into the premises.
European Leisure refused us an interview, yet after Leah died they were quick to appear on local radio.
As a company we do have a no drugs policy. We train our door staff to look out for the telltale signs, and if any of our management or security staff see anybody on the premises who might be dealing drugs, then they are detained and the police are called.
However, Essex police confirm they were never once called by management to investigate drugs in Raquel's during the entire year before Leah Betts died, even though former staff say the drug taking was obvious.
I mean, how could anyone not be aware? You've got 850 people who are going into a nightclub, hardly drinking any alcohol whatsoever, entering normal and well dressed, leaving drenched in sweat, eyes bulging. How could you not notice that?
European Leisure's supposedly drugs-free new club is equipped with a chill-out area. That suggests they acknowledge that punters may bring drugs into the club or take them beforehand. Several agencies bear responsibility for the drugs problem at Raquel's. Dispatch has decided to pay Bernard for his time in making this film. Does he feel any responsibility for Leah Betts' death? After all, he ran the door. He knew what was happening, the other side of it.
You admit you were turning a blind eye to what Mark Murray was doing.
Yes.
People watching this will say that makes you at least guilty in part to the operation which led to the death of Leah Betts.
No. I am being honest and open. And I want everyone to know about it, so it doesn't happen again.
The fact is, you're a criminal, you're a violent thug, and you're a liar. Why should anyone believe what you're saying?
They've just got to listen to what I've got to say, and I've got no motives for other than telling the truth, and people in authority will know I'm telling the truth. Whether they do anything about it is a matter for them. And time will tell I'm telling the truth.
In the end, the story of Leah Betts and the firm mirrors the situation across the country. People make pledges about drug-free clubs, but gangs will always be ready to exploit any weakness in Basildon, just as other gangs are doing tonight at clubs across Britain.
If you need help because of drugs, please telephone the National Drugs Helpline on 0800 77 6600. Lines are open 24 hours a day and all calls are free and confidential. That's 0800 77 6600. Your call will not appear on an itemised bill unless you call from a cable telephone.